I woke up this morning and I went, Geoff Keighley, you bastard! Fellas, I kind of just wanted to talk about the concept of the Game Awards as a whole. Not talking about any specific year, but talking about just how the Game Awards have really felt to me over the past decade plus at this point, and what I like about it, and what I think could be kind of changed in the future. Because as much as it's lame to admit, the Game Awards are a big deal now. I mean, every award show is kind of just pointless when you get down to it. It's just a bunch of people in the industry patting themselves on the back pretty much. But at the same time, there's a reason why awards are given out. There are reasons why award shows take place. You look at like a graduation ceremony at the end of high school or college, and it's like, is this really like everybody patting themselves on the back? Maybe, but I think it's good to have like a cap off to a period of time. In this case, it's the past year in gaming, and a bit of like a celebration of the past, but also looking forward to the future. Is it pointless at the end of the day? Sure. I don't think you should lose sleep over award shows. However, I do think the Game Awards is a cool thing to do, and at the same time, I think it does a lot of good for the medium of video games. Because prior to this, the thing that preceded the Game Awards was the Spike Video Game Awards, the Spike VGA. You remember Spike TV? They had such programming as Mansers, Gary the Rat, Stripperella. Spike TV was definitely a mid-2000s man sort of channel. Boobs, beer, breasts. Any of you like stop watching TV and then you actually like go on cable for the first time in years and you see like all these TV channels that you've known of are like completely different names? Like Spike TV turned into the Paramount Network now. ABC Family is now Freeform, and I'm like, yeah, go fuck yourself. I don't care. I don't even have a joke for that. Fuck you. It's always ABC Family to me. But either way, because this was on Spike, and this was kind of the 2000s, early 2010s, the Spike VGAs did not take themselves seriously at all. They did end up having, like, world premieres during this event, which I think actually gave you a reason to watch it. But if you look back at like the Spike VGAs, it was all taking video games so fucking stupidly. Like, it was just acting like video games are just fucking fun, right, dudes? Like, the fucking award for the Spike VGAs was a fucking statue of a monkey. The Spike VGAs would do stuff like in 2011, they kind of had like a moment where like, oh man, if this certain thing happens, we're gonna have like a Call of Duty soldier come out and take the fucking presenter and start fucking teabagging him. Whoa! And I'm like, buddy, that's assault! The Spike VGAs felt like a mature version of the Kids' Choice Awards. I mean, you can even see it in a lot of the categories a part of both award shows. The Spike VGAs had a consistent category for a while. There was Cyber Vixen of the Year, which is just pretty much just hottest babe. And the Kids' Choice Awards had best movie fart. So, tomato, tomato. You can have stupid segments in your award show, but I think it just kind of kept with this stigma that video games are just some dumb bullshit that just wastes your time. And obviously with declining ratings, people not watching TV as much in 2013, they did not air the Spike VGAs on TV, but rather they did something different called the VGX. And it pretty much just was live streamed on spike.com. And it was this really fucking awkward, bizarre, silent award show that was taking place on just a basic ass set. Now, while Geoff Keighley produced these shows, he moved on in 2014, doing it pretty much independently and just calling it the Game Awards. And to be honest, say what you will about the Game Awards, but I think Geoff Keighley succeeded in what he set out to do. I think he wanted to create pretty much the Oscars for video games. And actually, in the process, he ended up exceeding the Oscars in many ways. I mean, the Game Awards is consistently viewed in the hundreds of millions at this point. I mean, 2025, there was 171 million viewers reported to have been watching the Game Awards. Now, I always see this metric go up and up and up, and I think it is incredible, and I don't doubt that that's actually what the metric is. However, let's keep in mind when you compare the Game Awards to something like the Oscars and how the Oscars has been declining in viewership, well, there's a reason, and that's because the Oscars is always broadcast on TV. The Game Awards is free on YouTube for anybody to watch, and then all of the game publications want to just rebroadcast it themselves, so, you know, you have that going on. And then pretty much every single streamer on Twitch and YouTube, why wouldn't they react to the Game Awards? That's just free content. It's such an easy thing to just do where you're like, me and my viewers, let's just watch the Game Awards and we'll just critique everything. We'll react to the new reveals and we'll also just try to bet on which games will win which awards. It's just such a no-brainer for most people that stream to just stream watching the Game Awards. And those streams are counted in those millions of viewers. It's to the point where I would honestly say, I bet you 70% of the people that watch the Game Awards don't even really give a shit about them. But you can't deny these analytics. I think Geoff Keighley kind of cracked the code. How do you get people to watch an award show? You sprinkle in brand new reveals for video games in there. Now, like I said, the Spike VGAs already did this a bit. I do remember, like, the only one I can think of off the top of my head that was revealed at the Spike VGAs was, like, Kratos in Mortal Kombat 9. Like, he was revealed as a playable character. But the Game Awards took this and just ran with it and literally made the entire night basically mostly just about reveals. They turned the Game Awards into basically just a second E3 when we still had E3. Now, I think we all have to admit, if it wasn't for the reveals, the Game Awards would be getting literally 2% of the viewers that it gets right now. The reveals are integral to the Game Awards experience. As much as we want to sit back and be like, I think there's too many reveals. They don't care about the awards during the award show. If there weren't reveals, you wouldn't be watching the fucking award show. But thankfully, I do feel like because there are reveals as a part of this, that it has kind of gotten more and more and more people to give a shit about the awards. I see so many more people discussing the nominees and the winners more so than they ever did like 10 years ago during the 2014, 15, 16, 17 Game Awards. So Geoff Keighley, I think you cracked the code there. Congratulations. And I do feel like the Game Awards deserves some respect. Like I said, I do think the fact that it does take the video game industry much more seriously than the Spike VGAs did, I think really helped the medium out a lot. And video games are about fun. Let's not mince words here. You know, video games are about fun, and I do wish there was a bit more fun being had at the Game Awards. I mean, you look at the Oscars, and some of the most iconic moments from that are when they kind of tell jokes. Now, they're not as, like, crass and ridiculous as the fucking Spike VGAs back in the day. But, like, for example, a moment that I see people talking about a lot from the 2025 Oscars is when Ben Stiller came to present the Best Production Design Award, and you know, they purposely made the whole stage kind of bit malfunction. You know, that's just a fun gag. And while the Game Awards has moments like that sprinkled throughout, I think moments like that kind of get lost with the format of the show. I almost feel like while I think Geoff Keighley works as a host, I think it could benefit from like alternating hosts every year or so, kind of like how the other award shows do it. Because pretty much since the very start, it's just been Geoff Keighley hosting, and I think Geoff Keighley does a fine job. I don't have a fucking problem with Geoff. I just think he's a funny name to say. Geoff fucking Keighley. But I think with Geoff hosting and pretty much producing the show every single year, it makes it so then every single year basically feels the exact same. And you don't really see that as much with the Oscars or Emmys. I mean, they kind of all feel the same, but I think the host does play a big role in kind of making each show feel a little more unique. We'll probably talk about that later. I kind of want to just talk about a couple things that have always bugged me about the Game Awards. Not because I'm going like, fuck these things or whatever, because I do think the Game Awards is an important thing to have, and I think it's really cool that it's grown as much as it has, but it's never been perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but I think every Game Awards show is always like a solid 5 to 6 out of 10. Why is that? And what's one of my biggest problems with the Game Awards? Well, first things first, I want to talk about the categories of the Game Awards. I think these could be tweaked quite a bit. When I take a look at the other award shows for other mediums, you know, Oscars, Emmys, Tonys, Grammys, all of that, I feel like the categories are much more well-suited for those specific mediums, and they point out more specific things regarding those mediums. You know, I take a look at Emmy categories, and they also have, like, the Creative Arts Emmys, which goes into much more, like, specific categories. But you have costume design, casting, multiple camera editing for a drama series, single camera editing for a series, like all of this random stuff that is very much focused on just the artistic medium of creating a television series. Now, I'm not saying the Game Awards needs to get that deep into the weeds with its categories about like very minute elements of the game, but I do feel like with the categories as they are, I feel like a lot of these categories are way too broad, or they're all kind of categories that are just saying this is the best game in this genre, and this genre, and this genre. And that's fine to have stuff like that, but for a couple of these categories, it kind of reminds me of how the Oscars has, you know, the best animated feature category. Now, the Oscars only really has that category to pretty much throw animated movies a bone, because a lot of people don't really consider animated movies to be like actual movies. They kind of just consider it to be like, oh, it's just some kid bullshit or something like that. But every so often, an animated movie squeaks through and gets nominated for Best Picture overall. And at that point, like, I view it as kind of like, okay, so the best animated feature category is just a wash at this point. Like, who the f*** even cares? Like, you already know what's gonna win. Like, I believe you had Up in 2009 and then Toy Story 3 in 2010. Both of those movies got nominated for Best Animated Feature and Best Picture. I wonder who the f*** is gonna win Best Animated Picture. Like, to me, that pretty much makes it so then all the other nominees in that category are pretty much like, well, we lost. But then I would say if something other than, like, Toy Story 3 or Up won Best Animated Picture that year, I would just be confused as all hell. Like, I'm like, you're saying this movie got nominated for Best Picture of the Year, but it didn't win the far more limited category of, like, what's the Best Animated Picture of the Year? That doesn't make any sense. So it's kind of like when we take a look at the Game Awards 2025. Hades 2 was nominated for Game of the Year. And then you go over to Best Action Game, and it has all of these games that were not nominated for Game of the Year, and then it has Hades 2 as a part of Best Action Game, and that was nominated for Game of the Year. I wonder what fucking won Best Action Game. It was Hades 2. It was the only game that was also nominated for Game of the Year. So, like, I don't fucking care at this point. Like, yeah, no shit that's gonna win. But then I look back to the Game Awards in 2021, and Deathloop was nominated for all of these awards. You know, Game of the Year. It won Best Game Direction, won Best Art Direction, all of this stuff. But then, for Best Action Game, it was the only nominee there that was also nominated for Game of the Year, yet it lost to Returnal. And Returnal was not nominated for Game of the Year. So at that point, it just makes me question, like, okay, what? Is Deathloop one of the best overall games of the year, but as an action game overall, Returnal is better? Okay? Like, I just feel like all of the different awards based around genre, I almost feel like there's a bit too many. And it's also just kind of like, here's just other categories that the Game of the Year nominees can win in. I'm either like, yeah, no shit, the game that got nominated for Game of the Year wins that genre category, or I'm going like, well, what the f***? That doesn't make sense. Why did Returnal win Best Action Game, yet it's not even nominated for Game of the Year, yet Deathloop lost Best Action Game, yet it is nominated for Game of the Year? The Best Fighting Game category has always been a bit of an odd duck. It just kind of feels like it's there because it needs to be there, and not because enough fighting games really come out every year. This seems like the category where more often than not, they have to kind of pad it out with re-releases, collections, old games, games that aren't even fighting games. 2025 nominees for Best Fighting Game included the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection and Capcom Fighting Collection 2, which are collections of old-ass fighting games. You also had Multiverses in 2022, which won Best Fighting Game that year, and then it got nominated again in 2024 for Best Fighting Game. It lost that time, but it's kind of like, okay, like, this game already won Best Fighting Game. Yes, it was in, like, a beta version back then, and then in 2024, it was, like, a full official release, even though there wasn't a ton of differences between the two. So why was Multiverses allowed to get nominated multiple times at that point? Sifu was nominated for Best Fighting Game in 2022. But Sifu isn't a fucking fighting game. It's a beat 'em up. And then you had Jump Force in 2019 that got nominated, and that was notoriously just not a great game. So it was just obvious that they were kind of just like struggling with like, fuck. All right, what else do we add to the best fighting game category? But then you have like best sports/racing game. And I just feel like this is just such a hodgepodge category. Like, yes, racing can be, classified as a sport, but it's also like when you're putting Mario Kart World up against EA Sports FC, like it just gets to a point where I'm just kind of going like, okay, what are we judging these games on? Like how are we deciding which one is genuinely better? Because these are two completely different fucking games. One is like a soccer simulation game, and then the other is an arcade kart racer. I mean, I could go on and on critiquing how the categories are laid out and what gets nominated. A lot of the times I feel like you can definitely like nitpick the hell out of each of these categories. What I request here is gonna sound boring as hell. Like, I just think this would be a lot cooler. And again, I don't know anything, so it's just like, this is just what I've kind of thought. But I've noticed that pretty much instead of a lot of other award shows, generally, it's not really the people behind these games that are getting like nominated and their names pop up on screen and all of that. It's generally always the game. It's always the game. What gets nominated for Best Game Direction? This game. It's not Best Game Director, which I think is also another kind of confusing thing. Like, what are we rewarding here for Best Game Direction? Awarded for outstanding creative vision and innovation in game direction and design. Okay, so this is basically just a runner-up for Game of the Year at that point. But I'm just kind of confused because I look at the 2025 Game Awards and I'm thinking like, okay, so you're, nominating Ghost of Yotei and Split Fiction. These games weren't nominated for Game of the Year. And all these other games that got nominated for Game of the Year got nominated across all these other categories. But I look at stuff like, Donkey Kong Bonanza got nominated for Game of the Year. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 got nominated for Game of the Year. Yet, they didn't get nominated across the board for really anything else. So Donkey Kong is a Game of the Year candidate, but it only gets nominated for Best Family Game, and that's it. Yet Ghost of Yotei gets nominated for like 1 billion awards. It got nominated for like 7 awards, yet none of them were for Game of the Year. Why? So I just think something like Best Game Direction would make a lot more sense to me if it turned into Best Game Director or Directing Team, whoever was the creative director, whoever was the lead on that game. Because like, yeah, what the fuck am I voting for with Best Game Direction? Like, if the game feels more cinematic, if the game is designed extraordinarily well, like I'm just like, well, that like all the games nominated for pretty much every category here are designed extraordinarily well. I just think broadening up the categories and kind of getting rid of some of these genre categories, because a lot of these are just kind of like they're fillers. They don't even spend any time talking about them during the award show, which is often a criticism of the Game Awards. They often have like those little 5-minute segments where Geoff Keighley is standing and just rattles through like 10 awards just like that. But yeah, I think it would just be cooler if the actual people behind a lot of the elements of these games got nominated first and foremost, and it said for the game they worked on, and the categories were more designated to video games as an artistic medium rather than just say, well, this was the best game in this genre this year. For example, not saying this should be a category, but something for level design, world design, character design. There could be a category based on just technical achievement in general. You have best art direction, which is great, but I think it would be cool if there was a separate category that's just kind of talking about like, hey, this was a huge achievement technically speaking, which is different from like, oh, this game has a beautiful art direction. You could have categories based on just like the cinematics of a game themselves. I mean, some games have cutscenes that are on the level of movies. So it's just having a category that's just like best cutscene direction or something along those lines. Hell, even just having a category about game design in general. I know that's what the best game direction thing is trying to come across as, but it's also like, no, it's just, I feel like Best Game Direction direction a lot of the time is a category that's kind of like, what's the most cinematic game? Because looking at the 2025 categories, if we were genuinely talking about what games are designed the best, I would feel like something like Hollow Knight Silksong would appear in that category, because something like that, a Metroidvania, is one of the best designed types of video games out there when it's done as well as something like Hollow Knight Silksong. And I really like Ghost of Yotei. I think Ghost of Yotei should have been in the running for Game of the Year, and I feel like if they had one more slot open, I think it would have made it. However, to me, Ghost of Yotei belongs in Best Game Direction because it's very cinematic. Like that's kind of like why it's there. So and that's just scratching the surface. And a lot of the examples I gave, I don't think are like the greatest things in the world, but I think I would just really like to see more specific elements to the video games that we're talking about here get rewarded, rather than just say, oh, this game is the best in this genre, this game is the best in this genre. Or if we're talking about what wins best art direction, I kind of want to see the lead artist of the game, or one of the lead artists of the game, get nominated and we see their name on the nomination list, rather than just saying, oh, this game is really good, this game gets nominated. And going off of that, I would just really like to see more of the actual video game industry getting time to shine, rather than stuff that isn't really the video game industry, that definitely cost a shit ton of money and takes up so much damn time. When you had fucking Vin Diesel come out in 2019 to pretty much present Game of the Year, why? Why the fuck is Vin Diesel doing this? Or how in 2025 they had this big long ass segment where the entire cast of the Street Fighter movie came out on stage. Like, there are parts of this that are like, yeah, that's cool, I guess. But at the same time, this is taking up so much fucking time for no reason. How much did you actually need the entire cast of Street Fighter to be out on stage when only like 2 of them said anything of value there? It just shows this persistence that the Game Awards is kind of always chasing after the movie industry. Or maybe the movie industry is chasing after the Game Awards because they see how many people are watching and they see it as like, oh wow, we want this guy to be here. And you know, I assume a lot of these big celebrities do want to appear. But regardless, either way, you don't see Vin Diesel coming out to the Tonys to announce an award there. I just kind of want to see the Game Awards really lean more into the game industry as a whole, because I do feel like if you put a lot of the people that made these games out on stage, I think you would be surprised at how good of a response you're gonna get for that will be. And they definitely do that sometimes. I mean, Todd Howard at the 2025 Game Awards presented Best Game Direction. That makes sense. Todd Howard is a legendary game director. The director of Astro Bot, which was 2024's Game of the Year winner, presented the Game of the Year for 2025. And I remember all the way back in 2014, they were doing like the Industry Icon Award, and the founders of Sierra Entertainment won. And I find that, you know, Sierra and those old school PC games are oftentimes not really talked about much on such a big scale. And I think doing that kind of stuff is really fucking cool. Even if I'm not like into a lot of those old school PC games, I still think this is like a really cool thing, and it's celebrating the medium that I've chosen to waste my fucking life with. But while the Game Awards does do that, I think it all kind of gets bogged down with just the sheer amount of reveals throughout the show and all of the advertisements and how long the show is. The Game Awards is really fucking long, and even though they have a pre-show, don't get it twisted, there's nothing that really separates that pre-show from the actual show other than the fact that Geoff Keighley isn't presenting it. They're still giving out awards and they're still doing reveals. What makes this any fucking different? And I think, yeah, having a lot of reveals is really good, but the problem is the Game Awards is such a broad thing that I think it's very likely that every single one of us, we're only going to care about like 10% of the reveals, if that. But going back to my initial point, I think the pacing would feel a lot better if you focus on more so the people that actually made these games, or the people that worked on the specific things you're awarding things for, because I mean, like, yeah, the big thing with the 2025 Game Awards, oh, like, Claire Obscura won literally everything, and you just saw the same fucking people go up and down, up and down. I'm not really complaining about that. Like, yeah, that kind of was a boring element of the 2025 show. And I've seen some people say, oh, there should be a limit to how much one game can win, and I'm kind of like, well, no, like, you know, like Claire Obscura won. It was voted constantly for, like, all these different awards. Do I think it should have won all of those awards? I think it probably could have given up like 3 or 4 of them at the very least. But no, I mean, Claire Obscura won fair and square. You can complain about that all you want, but it's kind of like, no, like I don't think that's a massive issue. But I do feel like the categories as a whole are a bit too broad, and I don't really feel like they're really getting down and dirty with what specifically makes video games a unique medium. And I think seeing different people go up and cheering for specific artists in the field is much more interesting than specifically just thinking, what's the best sim/strategy game of the year? Can I just also talk about this? Why the fuck are there so many esports categories, yet this is like never really like shined upon? Like nobody cares about the esports categories. I'm not saying like nobody cares. I'm talking about the award show itself. They're always just brushed over. Nobody gives a shit. Yet there's like 3 esports awards. And then there's the content creator of the year, which in prior years basically almost exclusively focused on Twitch streamers. And listen, no disrespect to Twitch streamers, but, you know, I just kind of almost feel like there should be 2 separate categories for, like, streamer of the year and, like, creator of the year, like somebody that creates, like, scripted or at least edited content about video games. And, you know, to be fair, a lot of streamers are also creators, and a lot of creators are also streamers, you know, whatever. And, you know, I'm definitely pretty biased there because I don't really fuck around with streaming. Maybe someday, I don't know, but it's just never really been a huge passionate idea of mine. I've always been a much more of a fan of like writing and creating deliberate content based around video games, which isn't to take away from what streamers do, but that's just the thing. Like, I just view them as 2 very different things. Streaming is almost like it's an improv comedy act, or you're just trying to keep everybody's attention for a while, and that's fucking hard. So it's just like, I feel like that could be kind of expanded into 2 different categories if you're gonna have that category at all. I feel like at this point, the Game Awards doesn't really even need a content creator category. But it's also like, if you're gonna have multiple esports categories, you might as well have 2 different categories, one for streamers and one for more specific like YouTube creators or something. Okay, so my final thoughts on the Game Awards as a whole. I respect the Game Awards, and I appreciate the Game Awards for what they are. But I feel like the show has always kind of struggled with kind of pacing and also just having more of an enjoyable identity. And even when it does kind of have like moments of like fun, I know Geoff Keighley loves his Muppets, and hey, the Muppets are fun. I like that Geoff gets the Muppets involved every year, but that's just the thing. Like, they're there every year. So there's not really a ton that's like super surprising about this. And that's why I say, not that I don't like Geoff as a host, but I almost feel like having a new host every year or every other year or something can kind of help mix things up a little bit, and you don't really know what you're gonna get. You know, it follows a general format, but the vibe and the tone may be a bit different every year. Because as it is, there have been multiple years where I just skip out on watching the Game Awards, and I'll just kind of get a recap later down the line because, like, man, you gotta sit down for like 3 hours plus for this thing, and it gets a little much sometimes. Like, if I have pre-existing plans that day, I'm not gonna make an effort to go out of my way to watch the Game Awards. I'm not gonna plan around the Game Awards or anything like that. But I think for what it is, the Game Awards has succeeded in what it set out to do, and I think it's an important thing in our medium. While I think it would be fun if it joked around a little bit more, I think it's important to have kind of a more serious celebration of the video game industry compared to whatever the f that is. But there's always room for improvement every year. And I've been saying that for 10 years, Geoff, so fucking get to it, buddy. Holy shit. Nah, Geoff Keighley, the Game Awards, I respect them for what they are, and these are just some constructive pieces of criticism that I've kind of been thinking about over the years. Me and Geoff follow each other on Twitter, so maybe we can talk about these criticisms in person, or maybe I can just have you on Scott Stash. We can just play, like, Would You Rather or some bullshit like that. I don't know. I'd kind of prefer that.